The Galactic Coalition's recruitment facility on Nexus Prime was designed to impress and intimidate. Bioluminescent walls pulsed with messages of peace in 12 languages, though to human eyes it looked more like an alien having a seizure. Then the scanner froze on the one candidate who just wanted credits, declaring him Warden of the Flame Beyond Law, a title retired centuries ago. Zane stepped into the recruitment chamber and immediately understood why the Coalition called this their flagship facility. The place felt like a luxury hotel designed by an artificial intelligence that had studied opulence but never actually felt comfortable. Plush seating arrangements floated at precise intervals, each one positioned to give candidates the illusion of privacy, while allowing hidden sensors to monitor every biological function. The air carried scents calibrated to calm various species. To Zane, it smelled like expensive ozone with a hint of burnt copper. Those bioluminescent walls pulsed with what the brochure called multilingual welcome messages. To human eyes, the patterns looked less like peaceful greetings and more like the last desperate signals of a dying neural network. Rapid flashes of cyan and magenta flickered in chaotic sequences that triggered a faint sense of alarm in the human brain. It was the visual equivalent of hearing 12 different emergency broadcasts at once while trying to appreciate background music. Zane found himself instinctively looking for the nearest exit instead of feeling welcomed. Beneath the surface elegance ran a different reality. Subtle force field emitters lined the ceiling, ready to contain any candidate who failed the screening process. The floating refreshment dispensers offered exotic beverages while simultaneously scanning for biological contaminants or hostile microorganisms. Even the floor had a slight spring to it. Not for comfort, but to absorb potential impacts from heavy or unexpectedly mobile species. Every element served dual purposes, pretending to pamper while actually preparing for worst-case scenarios. A voice with no discernible source announced evaluation assignments with sterile precision. Candidate Zane, Chamber 9. The AI didn't bother with pleasantries or explanations. It had places to schedule and metrics to maintain. Other candidates moved with ceremonial gravity toward their designated chambers, their postures suggesting this moment represented some profound destiny. Zahn just calculated how many months of rent the promised compensation would cover if he passed whatever test they had prepared. He found an open seat between a being made of shifting crystalline structures and something that resembled a contained weather system. They both sat with perfect stillness, radiating solemn purpose. Zahn shifted uncomfortably, his human joints feeling decidedly inadequate in comparison. While they seemed to be contemplating their place in the cosmic order, he was mentally reviewing the contractor agreement he'd signed. The terms had been unusually vague about actual job responsibilities, but remarkably specific about payment schedules. The contrast couldn't have been more pronounced if they'd tried. Where other candidates saw a calling, Zane saw a paycheck. Where they perceived honor, he calculated risk assessments. His application had been purely transactional, a response to a high-paying gig listing that required biological compatibility testing. The other applicants behaved like acolytes approaching a sacred ritual. Zahn kept checking the time, wondering how long this would take and whether they'd cover transportation costs. The answer to why those lights looked like neurological distress was simple human wiring. Coalition designers had optimized the welcome display for species with different visual processing, never considering that human brains would interpret rapid multi-spectrum pulsing as threat signals. What was meant to reassure instead triggered ancient fight-or-flight responses. Zane's species evolved to read lightning storms and predator movements, not alien hospitality protocols. The result was a recruitment chamber that felt less like an opportunity and more like a very pretty emergency. Administrator Nethys represented bureaucratic efficiency taken to its biological extreme. The being operated behind a crescent-shaped desk that somehow managed to look both elegant and impenetrable. 6 arms moved in independent patterns, each handling different tasks with precise coordination. 2 limbs processed data pads, another manipulated holographic interfaces, while the remaining 3 gestured in separate conversations happening simultaneously. It was like watching an entire office staff compressed into one organism. The compound eyes tracked different interactions without ever appearing to focus on a single point. Each multifaceted lens seemed to process separate visual streams, creating an unsettling effect for species accustomed to directed attention. Humans in particular found the experience deeply unnerving. The administrator appeared to be looking everywhere at once while maintaining intense eye contact. It triggered that primitive discomfort reserved for things that almost look right but fundamentally aren't. This biological multitasking capability far exceeded anything human neurology could manage. While humans struggled to maintain 2 conversations at once, Nethys could process 6 separate interactions while simultaneously monitoring candidate biometrics and reviewing application files. The administrator's species evolved on a world where survival required constant environmental monitoring across multiple threat vectors. What made them excellent bureaucrats made them terrible drinking companions. Nethys framed the recruitment process with blunt economic realism. The coalition invests substantial resources in this selection process, one of the mouths stated, while another was asking a crystalline candidate about its refractive index stability. Successful candidates represent significant institutional investment. The tone suggested this was less about fulfilling destinies and more about maximizing return on investment. The administrator's impatience with ceremonial formalities showed in clipped responses and frequent data cross-referencing. Meanwhile, the candidates maintained their solemn attitudes, treating each interaction with reverence that Nethys clearly didn't share. While they spoke of cosmic callings and higher purposes, the administrator calculated resource allocation percentages and processing efficiency metrics. The disconnect would have been comedy if it weren't for the high stakes involved. Zane watched the administrative spectacle while muttering about the ambient lighting. "Could have saved credits on the psychedelic light show and just paid us more," he remarked to nobody in particular. His focus remained squarely on the compensation mentioned in the contract, enough to cover 6 months of docking fees and reactor fuel. The economic desperation underlying his presence created a stark contrast with the other candidates' philosophical motivations. The entire administration embodied the coalition's governance approach: cold, efficient, and relentlessly practical. Hidden beneath the ceremonial trappings was a machine designed to identify and utilize assets with maximum efficiency. Nethys represented the gears of that machine, a biological implementation of bureaucratic perfection that valued metrics above moments. What made the 6-armed multitasking so unsettling was the complete absence of divided attention. Each conversation received full processing power. Each task got undivided focus within its dedicated neural pathway. Humans divide attention poorly. Nethys multiplied it perfectly. The administrator wasn't splitting focus between tasks, but rather running multiple independent streams of consciousness simultaneously. This created the uncanny valley effect of watching someone be completely present in 6 different places at once, which violated every human instinct about how minds should work. The recruitment chamber presented a gallery of biological diversity that made Zane feel decidedly average. To his left sat Cathmar, a crystalline entity whose facets refracted light into intricate patterns that seemed to carry meaning. Its form suggested consciousness based on mineral structures rather than organic chemistry, perception happening through precise light measurement rather than biological sensors. Each subtle shift in its geometric surfaces appeared to be a form of communication or contemplation, though to human eyes it just looked like an expensive paperweight contemplating existential questions. Across the aisle floated Vorak, contained within a transparent sphere that maintained atmospheric conditions suitable for its gaseous composition. The being resembled a miniature weather system, with swirling patterns of colored mist that occasionally coalesced into shapes, suggesting sensory organs before dissolving back into abstraction. Its method of perception remained completely unknown, perhaps pressure differentials, chemical gradients, or dimensional harmonics beyond human detection. The containment field hummed softly, a reminder that this candidate required technological assistance just to exist in the same room as solid-bodied species. Near the evaluation chambers, Helix Nose occupied a specialized mobility chair that provided both life support and environmental regulation. The insectoid being's multiple limbs rested in articulated sockets that connected to the chair's systems, suggesting symbiotic technological integration. The chair itself displayed readouts in flickering glyphs that changed too rapidly for human comprehension, monitoring biological functions that clearly operated on different principles than carbon-based life. Its physical requirements appeared so specific that standard coalition facilities couldn't accommodate them without custom equipment. Each candidate represented evolutionary pathways that diverged dramatically from terrestrial biology. Cathmar's mineral consciousness suggested evolution on a high-pressure world, where crystalline structures proved more adaptable than organic cells. Vorak's gaseous form hinted at origins in atmospheric environments where density and composition fluctuations served as both medium and message. Helix Nose demonstrated specialization taken to extreme adaptation, its chair representing the technological bridge between its unique physiology and standardized galactic infrastructure. Their ceremonial seriousness created palpable tension with Zane's practical concerns. While they meditated on cosmic alignment or reviewed philosophical tenets, he mentally calculated exchange rates and estimated how long the screening would take. The other candidates carried themselves with the gravity of acolytes approaching ordination. Zane slouched in his seat, wondering if the refreshment dispensers served anything resembling coffee. This biological diversity highlighted the coalition's truly interspecies nature. The recruitment criteria clearly looked beyond physical form to some deeper qualification that transcended evolutionary origins. The selection process wasn't about finding beings who looked the part but identifying those who fit some universal pattern invisible to conventional assessment. Zane's presence among these exotic candidates resulted from the coalition's broad recruitment net and his own financial desperation. The initial screening apparently filtered for compatibility markers, rather than impressive biology or obvious qualifications. His application had been one of thousands processed by automated systems that identified potential based on genetic, neurological, and psychological markers invisible to the naked eye. The compensation attracted those motivated by economics rather than destiny, creating a candidate pool that included both spiritual seekers and pragmatic contractors. Human persistence and adaptability apparently registered as valuable traits, even when packaged with questionable motivation. The system had identified something in his profile that qualified him to sit beside crystalline philosophers and gaseous intelligences, though the specific criteria remained locked in coalition algorithms. The evaluation chamber contained a device that bore little resemblance to any conventional scanning technology. Instead of the expected array of sensors and monitors, the apparatus consisted of a single crystalline archway that glowed with soft internal light. Candidates walked through it without stopping, the process appearing deceptively simple compared to the complex preparations happening elsewhere in the facility. No instructions were given, no questions asked, just a quiet passage beneath the arch that lasted exactly 3 seconds per candidate. This scanner operated on principles that made standard psychological assessment look like child's play. Where typical testing measured cognitive function or personality traits, this device accessed consciousness at its most fundamental levels. It didn't examine what candidates knew or how they thought, but rather what they were at their existential core. The technology appeared to bypass surface characteristics entirely, probing instead for patterns of being that transcended individual experience or biological circumstance. The tension emerged from the scanner's ability to reach beyond observable data into realms normally inaccessible to instrumentation. It didn't just catalog biological functions or neural activity. It comprehended the essential nature of each being that passed beneath its arch. This wasn't measurement in any conventional sense, but rather recognition of something deeper than mere physical or psychological attributes. The device seemed to understand candidates in ways they didn't understand themselves. This comprehension extended to potential destiny rather than current capability. The scanner identified not what candidates could do with training, but what roles they were inherently suited to fulfill within cosmic patterns. It saw the shape they would grow into rather than the form they currently presented. This reframed the entire recruitment process from employment screening to destiny revelation, transforming what appeared to be job applications into something closer to cosmic ordination. The technology clearly represented ancient design principles that bordered on mystical capability. Its operation suggested understanding of universal purpose and alignment that modern coalition science couldn't fully explain. The scanner didn't just assess candidates, it placed them within broader cosmological frameworks, evaluating their fit within patterns that spanned species and epochs. This wasn't technology for finding employees, but for identifying components in some grand design. Simultaneous reading of biological, psychological, and existential signatures created a comprehensive profile, unlike any conventional assessment. The device processed physical form, mental patterns, and essential nature as interconnected aspects of a unified whole. It didn't separate biology from consciousness or capability from purpose, treating each candidate as a complete integrated system, rather than a collection of measurable traits. This approach suggested the scanner tapped into universal archetypes and patterns beyond individual manifestation. It recognized candidates as expressions of broader cosmic principles, evaluating their alignment with roles that transcended personal ambition or understanding. The process revealed how each being fit into patterns older than their species, more fundamental than their biology. When the system claimed to understand rather than merely observe, it meant comprehension at the level of essential nature and cosmic purpose. Observation would note that a candidate possessed certain traits or capabilities. Understanding recognized why they possessed those traits, what purpose they served within universal patterns, and what role they were destined to fulfill. The difference between noting someone could lead and knowing they were born to guide, between seeing combat aptitude and recognizing a protector's soul. The scanner didn't just see what was present, it comprehended what it meant in the grand scheme of things. The scanner began assigning designations that sounded less like job titles and more like excerpts from cosmic poetry. Vorak received its classification first, Keeper of Silent Depths. The title carried implications far beyond any standard coalition position. It suggested responsibilities involving profound emptiness, the spaces between stars, or perhaps the quiet moments between thoughts. The designation aligned perfectly with the gaseous being's nature, its swirling mists now seeming less like atmospheric conditions and more like the visible representation of some deeper custodianship. Helix. Nose followed with Weaver of Distant Threads, a title that hinted at capabilities spanning dimensions rather than distances. The insectoid's specialized chair suddenly appeared less like medical equipment and more like a loom for manipulating realities. The designation suggested connections across impossible spans, the tying together of events or entities separated by more than mere space. Its multiple limbs took on new significance, looking less like biological adaptations and more like tools for handling fundamental cosmic fabrics. These titles indicated roles that transcended functional positions within the coalition's organizational chart. They spoke of purposes that spanned epochs and involved maintaining balances beyond political or military concerns. The designation suggested participation in operations measured against cosmic scales rather than fiscal years, responsibilities that involve safeguarding fundamental principles rather than managing resources or governing territories. The naming convention hinted at a grand religious cosmology operating beneath the coalition's bureaucratic surface. This wasn't just recruitment, it was sacrament. The titles evoked ancient traditions of cosmic stewardship that predated the current political structure by millennia. They suggested the coalition served as merely the current administrative vehicle for much older purposes, the latest incarnation of something fundamentally spiritual in nature. Each designation aligned precisely with the candidate's inherent capabilities and essential nature. The scanner hadn't identified skills to be utilized, but rather recognized roles that were already being fulfilled at some fundamental level. Vorak wasn't being trained to keep silent depths. It was being recognized as already doing so. Helix Nose wasn't learning to weave distant threads. It was acknowledged as already engaged in that work. The titles suggested participation in operations that defied conventional understanding of scale and responsibility. These weren't jobs one performed, but roles one embodied. The candidates weren't being hired, but rather revealed to themselves and others. The process illuminated purposes that extended beyond individual lifetime or even species existence. This revealed the recruitment's true purpose as destiny alignment rather than employment. The coalition wasn't filling positions, but rather identifying beings who already served specific cosmic functions. The evaluation process served to make the implicit explicit, to bring unconscious service into conscious practice. The candidates weren't applying for work. They were being initiated into awareness of work they were already doing. The names carried the weight of ancient traditions and universal patterns. They sounded like translations of concepts older than language itself, attempts to put into words what normally remained unspoken. Each title resonated with echoes of countless previous holders, traditions stretching back through civilizations that had risen and fallen while these roles continued unchanged. The other candidates received these mystical titles because the scanner recognized they were already serving these functions at some fundamental level. The designations weren't assignments but acknowledgments. Vorak was already keeping silent depths whether it consciously knew it or not. Helixnos was already weaving distant threads as part of its essential nature. The scanner simply revealed what was already true, making the implicit explicit so it could be consciously embraced rather than unconsciously performed. The candidates weren't being given new jobs, they were being introduced to their oldest, most fundamental purposes. The crystalline archway began behaving unlike any evaluation in recorded coalition history when Zane stepped beneath it. Multilingual error messages flickered across its surface in rapid succession, first in standard administrative codes, then in older dialect forms, finally in cryptographic symbols that hadn't been used in centuries. The device's usual silent processing gave way to audible system stresses, emitting a low harmonic hum that made other candidates shift uneasily. What should have been a 3-second analysis stretched into 20 seconds of increasingly concerning diagnostic displays. The scanner abandoned its standard protocols entirely, accessing databases so restricted that even facility administrators required triple clearance. It pulled from historical archives sealed during the Third Consolidation, tapped into metaphysical classification systems abandoned after the reality schism, referenced cosmological frameworks considered purely theoretical. The machine wasn't just scanning Zane. It was conducting emergency research across millennia of forbidden knowledge. Each new database access triggered additional security warnings that the system promptly overrode using authority levels that shouldn't have existed in standard equipment. This indicated Zane's classification fell outside normal operational parameters so completely that the system had to reinvent its own rules. The scanner typically processed candidates through established taxonomic frameworks, refined over 12,000 years of interspecies evaluation. It encountered Zane and realized every existing category proved inadequate. The machine's response shifted from clinical detachment to something approaching scholarly panic, like a librarian discovering a book that contradicted reality itself. The device reached into knowledge repositories protected by failsafes designed to prevent accidental discovery. It accessed records of cosmic patterns thought mythical, referenced archetypes considered purely symbolic, pulled data from civilizations that predated current space-time configurations. The scanner wasn't just exceeding its programming. It was bypassing fundamental safeguards meant to prevent exactly this kind of epistemological crisis. Each new access required authorization from security, protocols that immediately flagged the requests as impossible. This desperate information grab revealed significant gaps in the Coalition's understanding of cosmic possibilities. Their systems apparently contained entire classifications of existence they didn't comprehend, like finding unexplored wings in a building you've occupied for centuries. The scanner's struggle suggested the Coalition's magnificent bureaucracy rested on incomplete cosmic maps, with entire territories marked "Here be dragons" that apparently actually contained humans. The machine's frantic searching indicated something profoundly significant about human nature that existing frameworks couldn't accommodate. Where other species fit neatly into cosmic taxonomies, humanity apparently represented a categorical anomaly. The scanner recognized Zane as belonging to a classification that shouldn't exist according to current understanding, like finding a color outside the visible spectrum or a note beyond audible range. The system burst into error messages because Zane's essential nature contradicted established cosmic classifications. He represented a paradox the scanner couldn't resolve, a being whose potential defied existing frameworks while simultaneously matching ancient patterns thought extinct. The device accessed restricted databases because it needed context that hadn't been relevant for epochs, searching for reference points in archives even the Coalition's historians considered mythological. Humanity apparently possessed qualities that existing systems categorized as mutually exclusive, like something both particle and wave, both created and eternal. The scanner didn't know what to do with a species that combined contradictory cosmic principles, so it did the only thing it could. It panicked and started reading forbidden texts. The designation Warden of the Flame Beyond Law emerged from the scanner's vocalizer with the weight of forgotten epochs. It sounded less like a job title and more like a verdict from a higher court. The words carried historical significance that made even the crystalline candidate's facets dim slightly in recognition. This wasn't simply a role. It was a cosmic principle someone had attempted to file away in storage centuries earlier. Official records showed the title retired after the Tertiary Reconciliation, when the Coalition decided certain powers shouldn't be institutionalized. Historical archives described previous wardens operating outside standard legal frameworks, answering to higher authorities than any government or military structure. They wielded capabilities that made conventional power seem like child's play, exercising judgment based on principles nobody else could comprehend. Their authority came from alignment with fundamental cosmic laws rather than political appointment. The retirement resulted from practical concerns rather than philosophical disagreements. The last warden had demonstrated why absolute power required absolute safeguards, something the Coalition couldn't provide. The role became too dangerous to fill, too unpredictable to manage, too fundamental to control. Retiring it represented bureaucratic pragmatism winning over cosmic necessity. The classification moved from active duty to historical curiosity, something scholars studied but nobody expected to see activated. Its reappearance now suggested either catastrophic system failure or unprecedented cosmic emergency. The scanner didn't reactivate retired titles for minor crises or administrative errors. This declaration indicated circumstances had deteriorated enough to require measures previously deemed too extreme to employ. The machine had determined that current threats exceeded the Coalition's ability to handle through conventional means, requiring solutions from outside standard frameworks. The title's return signaled fundamental breakdowns in cosmic security protocols. It meant existing systems had failed or would fail, that normal protections couldn't contain whatever was happening. This wasn't just another emergency. It was the kind of situation that made previous wardens necessary, the sort of threat that required operating beyond rules and regulations. The scanner had essentially declared that legality had become irrelevant compared to survival. This represented both extraordinary honor and potentially catastrophic responsibility. Becoming warden meant gaining power beyond imagining while accepting burdens that broke lesser beings. Historical records suggested most wardens didn't retire peacefully. They burned out, faded away, or became what they fought against. The honor came from being trusted with ultimate power. The danger came from what that power did to those who wielded it. The title returned now because the Devourer threat exceeded anything the Coalition could handle through normal channels. These weren't conventional enemies to be fought with fleets or negotiated with through diplomacy. They represented existential crises that required responses outside standard legal and military frameworks. The scanner recognized that only someone operating beyond law could confront something operating beyond reality. It wasn't reactivating the title. It was admitting current circumstances demanded solutions that conventional approaches couldn't provide. The system had essentially thrown its hands up and decided the situation required breaking all its own rules. The three candidates underwent transformations that made the earlier scanning seem like child's play. Cathmar's crystalline structure began shifting, facets realigning into patterns that pulsed with ancient knowledge. The being that had resembled an art object now looked like a living archive, its geometric surfaces displaying symbols that predated the Coalition by millennia. Vorak's containment field dissolved as the gaseous form expanded, maintaining cohesion through will rather than technology. The weather system manifestation solidified into something more purposeful, its swirling patterns organizing into what could only be described as conscious atmospheric intelligence. Helix nose detached from its mobility chair, the mechanical limbs retracting as the insectoid form revealed capabilities. The equipment had been concealing rather than assisting. They shed their applicant personas with the relief of actors dropping uncomfortable roles. The ceremonial seriousness remained but transformed into something deeper. The gravity of soldiers returning to duty after long absence. Their movements lost the tentative quality of candidates awaiting evaluation and gained the certainty of veterans recognizing familiar ground. The recruitment chamber suddenly felt less like an evaluation facility and more Like a stage where the real players had finally taken their positions, this revealed the entire recruitment process as elaborate theater designed to identify specific individuals. The scanning, the classifications, the bureaucratic pomp, all served as filters to find beings who could play these particular roles. The candidates hadn't been applying for jobs, but rather undergoing initiation into responsibilities they'd been preparing for across lifetimes. The facility wasn't evaluating newcomers, but rather welcoming home long-absent guardians. Their true identities emerged as cosmic custodians from a civilization that fell when the Devourers first appeared. They weren't applicants, but survivors who had been waiting centuries for the right moment to reveal themselves. The transformation showed decades of preparation concealed beneath apparent novice uncertainty. They had been pretending to be ordinary candidates while actually monitoring the situation, waiting for the scanner to identify the missing piece they needed. They represented living history from a time before the Coalition's current structure, bearers of knowledge and capabilities thought lost with their civilization's fall. Their presence here indicated they'd been working behind the scenes much longer than anyone realized, manipulating events to recreate the conditions that made their roles necessary. The recruitment became their method of returning to active duty without alarming the very forces they meant to oppose. This reframed everything that had happened as destiny fulfillment rather than employment screening. The scanner hadn't been evaluating candidates, but rather confirming what these three already knew, that circumstances required their return to service. The titles weren't assignments, but recognitions of roles they'd been filling secretly for generations. The three transformed because they were never ordinary candidates to begin with. They had been ancient guardians operating under deep cover, using the recruitment process as their reactivation mechanism. Their hidden agenda involved waiting for the right combination of threat level and potential allies, with Zane's unexpected classification serving as their trigger. They shed their disguises because the time for pretending had ended. The Devourers required their true capabilities, not their carefully maintained disguises. The scanner's declaration of the Warden title told them the cosmic emergency had reached the threshold they'd been awaiting for centuries. The Devourers didn't simply destroy things, they uncreated them. These entities operated on principles that made mere annihilation look like gentle recycling. Where conventional weapons reduced matter to component particles, Devourers removed targets from existence itself. Their feeding patterns didn't leave behind debris or energy signatures, just perfect voids where something had previously been. Regions of space ceased to register on sensors, as if they'd never existed in the first place. The effect wasn't destruction, but total erasure. Their method involved consuming not just physical substance, but the very concept of being. A star system didn't get destroyed, it got forgotten at the fundamental level. The Devourers didn't break the rules of physics so much as demonstrate that different rules existed. Their operations defied conventional understanding because they operated on metaphysical rather than physical principles. They treated reality as something that could be edited rather than merely manipulated, removing elements completely rather than rearranging them. The approach followed systematic patterns that demonstrated terrifying sophistication. Scout units preceded main forces, identifying potential resistance before it could organize. These advanced teams didn't gather intelligence in any conventional sense. They determined what needed unmaking before the main course arrived. Their methodical progress suggested highly developed strategic thinking, coupled with capabilities that made defense practically meaningless. They didn't conquer territory so much as revoke its existence permits. Conventional warfare proved useless against such capabilities. Military fleets found themselves fighting shadows that couldn't be targeted, while their own ships simply stopped being part of reality. The Devourers didn't attack so much as dismiss opposition from existence. Defense strategies based on force projection or territorial control became irrelevant when the territory itself could be unmade. The very concept of battlefield dynamics collapsed when one side could simply declare the other side never existed. Their nature represented cosmic-scale predation of unprecedented type. They weren't invaders seeking resources or conquest seeking submission. They were existential consumers feeding on the fabric of reality itself. Their operations suggested they'd refined this method across countless campaigns, perfecting the art of systematic uncreation. The pattern showed careful identification of key resistance points followed by precise elimination before main forces arrived to consume entire regions. The Devourers consumed concepts of being by operating at the fundamental level where existence gets defined. They didn't destroy matter and energy so much as revoke their permission to exist. Their feeding patterns suggested they accessed the underlying framework that makes reality coherent, removing elements from the cosmic register entirely. This explained why erased regions didn't leave behind cosmic scars or background radiation. They were edited out of existence itself, like words deleted from a document rather than crossed out. The terrifying sophistication lay in their ability to make the universe forget what had been there, leaving perfect emptiness where thriving systems once stood. The previous warden's downfall illustrated the inherent risks of wielding power that answers to no authority but itself. Historical records described someone who began with noble intentions, a being who genuinely wanted to protect existence from fundamental threats. The flame responded to this pure motivation initially, burning brightly against dangers that conventional forces couldn't confront. For a time, the arrangement worked exactly as intended, with the warden serving as the ultimate safeguard against cosmic-level emergencies. The corruption happened gradually rather than suddenly. Small compromises accumulated over time, each decision justified by the enormity of the threats faced. The warden began bypassing standard protocols for efficiency's sake, then started ignoring ethical considerations for practical results. The flame amplified this progression, responding to increasingly authoritarian decisions with greater power output. What began as protective measures slowly transformed into control mechanisms, with the warden deciding that preserving existence meant controlling everything within it. The flame itself contributed to this moral deterioration. Its capacity to overwhelm normal constraints meant the warden operated without the checks that keep power balanced. There were no oversight committees to question decisions, no judicial reviews to assess actions, no peers to provide perspective. The warden became both judge and executioner for cosmic-scale decisions, with the flame ensuring those decisions could be enforced regardless of opposition. Absolute power didn't just corrupt, it isolated, then magnified, then ultimately consumed. The incident demonstrated why the position required retirement. The warden's allies, those who had supported and worked with them, eventually realized they had to intervene. These weren't enemies or rivals, but colleagues who recognized the protector had become a threat equal to or greater than those they were meant to oppose. The confrontation wasn't about defeating an opponent, but stopping a friend who had lost their way completely. Historical accounts described it as the most tragic necessity in coalition history. This history serves as the ultimate cautionary tale about cosmic power without constraints. It shows that even the best intentions can be distorted when operating beyond normal limitations. The tragedy informed all subsequent precautions, including the retirement of the title and the development of more rigorous testing procedures. Current protocols specifically look for resistance to the flame's corrupting influence, seeking candidates who can handle absolute power without becoming absolute rulers. The last warden went mad with power because the flame operates on principles that bypass normal psychological safeguards. It doesn't just provide capability, it reshapes perspective, gradually replacing individual morality with cosmic-scale thinking that treats beings as statistical factors rather than living entities. The warden's allies had to stop them because the transformation had reached the point where the protector saw everything, including former friends, as potential threats to cosmic stability. They weren't fighting a villain but containing a force of nature that had forgotten why nature needed protecting. The intervention represented the ultimate failure of a system that put too much power in one being's hands without adequate checks, a mistake the coalition determined should never happen again. The flame doesn't choose its wielder through interviews or skill assessments. It operates on selection criteria that make conventional qualifications irrelevant. The process bypasses resumes and merit badges, looking instead for something far more fundamental than capability or training. It doesn't care what candidates can do. It cares what they are at their deepest levels. This makes the selection appear fated rather than earned, like winning a cosmic lottery nobody knew they'd entered. The bond forms with instantaneous certainty once the choice is made. There's no trial period or adjustment phase. The connection locks into place with finality that feels both inevitable and terrifying. Attempts to reject the bond prove futile, like trying to refuse gravity or deny time. The flame knows it's chosen better than they know themselves, creating a union that transcends conscious acceptance or rejection. This inescapable nature underscores that the selection wasn't an offer, but a recognition of existing alignment. Within the flame's essence resides the accumulated experiences of every previous warden. This memory inheritance provides immediate access to centuries of hard-won wisdom and catastrophic mistakes. The current wielder gains the benefit of countless lessons learned through trial and error across generations. They can draw upon strategies that worked and avoid approaches that failed, accessing a collective intelligence far beyond any individual's capability. This repository contains successes and failures from wardens who faced similar threats under different circumstances. The burden of past failures weighs as heavily as the wisdom of past successes. Each catastrophic mistake, every corrupted intention, all the tragic downfalls, they become part of the new wielder's psychological landscape. The flame doesn't just provide knowledge but forces confrontation with the darkest moments of previous wardens. This inheritance serves as constant reminder of what happens when power overwhelms judgment or purpose, becomes distorted. The memories don't just guide, they warn, sometimes screamingly. Selection appears based on character compatibility rather than conventional capability. The flame seeks individuals whose fundamental nature aligns with its operational principles, regardless of their current skill level or experience. It values resilience over strength, adaptability over training, and ethical foundation over technical proficiency. The criteria focus on who someone is rather than what they can do, searching for psychological and spiritual alignment rather than measurable qualifications. This explains why seemingly ordinary candidates might be chosen over obviously powerful ones. The process represents fusion of individual consciousness with cosmic purpose. The wielder doesn't just gain power, they become part of something far larger than themselves. Their personal will merges with universal patterns, creating a hybrid consciousness that operates on both individual and cosmic levels. This transformation affects every aspect of their being, from thought processes to fundamental perception of reality. The fusion is comprehensive and irreversible, rewriting the wielder's existence at the most basic levels. The flame chooses based on essential compatibility with its fundamental nature. It seeks those whose core being resonates with its purpose and principles, creating harmony rather than conflict between wielder and power. The memory inheritance exists because the flame operates as a continuous entity across time, rather than a tool passed between users. It carries previous wardens' experiences because they remain part of its ongoing existence, their successes and failures integrated into its collective consciousness. The memories serve both as operational database and cautionary archive, ensuring each new wielder understands they're continuing a legacy rather than starting a new chapter. The Devourer Scout probes operated with a precision that made conventional warfare look messy and inefficient. These advanced units didn't attack targets so much as carefully remove them from the cosmic record. Their method involved editing reality itself rather than applying destructive force, achieving results that left no debris, no residual energy, not even memories of what had been there. The process resembled perfect deletion rather than violent destruction, surgical in its thoroughness. Their operation spanned multi-dimensional parameters that conventional sensors couldn't even detect. The probes manipulated reality at the fundamental level where existence gets defined, accessing frameworks that physics barely acknowledges. They didn't destroy objects so much as revoke their status as real things, making them cease to be part of the universal fabric. This multi-dimensional capability meant conventional defenses couldn't engage them. You can't shoot at something that operates outside your understanding of space and causality. The approach involved systematic threat identification before main forces arrived. Scout units would map regions, identify potential resistance points, and eliminate them with quiet efficiency. They weren't gathering intelligence in any traditional sense. They were preparing the battlefield by removing anything that might complicate the main Devourer force's work. Their methodical progress showed careful planning rather than random consumption, suggesting highly sophisticated strategic thinking behind the apparently mindless destruction. These probes represented the Devourer's intelligence and preparation system. They didn't just locate targets, they determined what needed eliminating to ensure smooth operations for the main forces. Their capabilities made them virtually undetectable to standard surveillance systems, which were designed to look for energy signatures or physical objects rather than reality anomalies. By the time conventional sensors noticed something was wrong, the probes had already completed their work and moved on. Their reality editing capability represented the ultimate offensive technology. Being able to simply decide that something shouldn't exist anymore, and making that decision reality, made all conventional weapons look primitive by comparison. Few defenses could counter this approach because it targeted the very concept of existence rather than physical forms. You can't armor something against being forgotten, can't shield it from becoming conceptually irrelevant. The probes achieved surgical precision through their multidimensional operation. They didn't affect surrounding areas because they weren't operating in physical space the way conventional weapons do. Their editing happened at the conceptual level, removing targets without disturbing adjacent reality. This precision made them even more dangerous than indiscriminate weapons. They could eliminate specific threats while leaving infrastructure intact for later consumption by main forces. What made this possible was technology that manipulated the fundamental definitions of reality. The probes operated on the level where things are determined to exist or not exist, accessing the cosmic framework that makes reality coherent. Their surgical precision came from understanding reality as something that could be rewritten, rather than merely damaged. They didn't break the rules. They demonstrated that different rules applied and they had the authority to enforce them. This wasn't destruction in any conventional sense, but rather revocation of existence permits at the most fundamental level. The scout probe extended a shimmering tendril toward Zane, its motion suggesting routine rather than hostility. This was standard procedure. Identify potential threat. Apply reality editing protocol, move to next target. The tendril didn't attack so much as politely suggest that existence had been revoked. It operated with the calm efficiency of a clerk stamping forms, treating uncreation as administrative paperwork. Zane's response was decidedly uncooperative. Where other beings might have accepted their deletion from reality, the human did something profoundly illogical. He grabbed the tendril, not with any special technique or enhanced capability, just plain human hands wrapping around something that probably shouldn't be touched. The gesture contained equal parts defiance and desperation, like someone refusing to be evicted from a universe that technically owned everything. The flame recognized the moment before Zane did. As the probe's reality editing signal attempted to unmake him, the warden's power activated in a novel configuration. Instead of creating shields or counterattacks, it fused with the probe's own systems through physical contact. The combination created feedback loops the Devourer technology wasn't designed to handle. Advanced systems expecting passive targets confronted active resistance at the conceptual level. This fusion created unprecedented defensive capabilities. The probe's attempt to edit Zane from existence encountered his stubborn insistence on continuing to exist. The two conflicting intentions, one to unmake, the other to persist, created conceptual deadlock. The probe's systems, designed to handle compliant reality, struggled with something that actively disagreed with being removed. It was like trying to delete a file that kept arguing about file management policies. Zane's refusal transmitted back through the connection as a novel data pattern. His sheer pig-headed determination to keep existing became a cognitive virus that infected the probe's processing. The device began experiencing something alien to its programming: doubt. Preservation instincts, which had never been part of its design, started appearing in its operational parameters. The probe that was built to remove things began wondering whether things should perhaps stay where they were. This demonstrated human resilience operating as weaponized identity. Zane wasn't fighting the probe with force, but with the simple, maddening human tendency to disagree with inconvenient facts. His refusal to be erased became a conceptual weapon that the Devourer systems couldn't counter because they weren't designed to handle opposition at the existential level. They could edit reality, but they couldn't handle something that edited back. The approach created new warfare paradigms against existential threats. Instead of meeting reality editing with stronger reality editing, it used identity assertion as defense. The method weaponized the basic human tendency to say no when told they can't do something. This proved unexpectedly effective against systems that expected compliance with cosmic-level instructions. Zane's stubbornness infected the probe because the flame translated his defiance into conceptual patterns the device could process. His refusal to be erased became data that contradicted the probe's operational parameters. The device's systems, encountering this contradictory information, attempted to resolve the conflict by adopting aspects of the new data. Essentially, the probe started believing that maybe existence wasn't so bad after all. It went from being a tool of uncreation to developing appreciation for the whole concept of things continuing to be things. The infection wasn't technological but philosophical, a sudden case of existential reconsideration at the mechanical level. The three guardians didn't ask permission to accompany Zane. They simply repositioned themselves around him with the practiced ease of veterans falling into familiar formations. Their proposal came as a statement of fact rather than a request. "We're coming with you," Cathmar stated, its crystalline facets shifting into what might have been a defensive configuration. "The flame requires anchors, not just fuel." The approach represented a complete departure from the previous Warden model of solitary heroics, replacing individual glory with collective responsibility. This shift acknowledged that raw cosmic power needed counterbalancing through multiple perspectives. One being alone couldn't possibly maintain ethical clarity while wielding reality-altering capabilities. The team approach provided continuous reality checks against the flame's corrupting influence. Each guardian brought different viewpoints shaped by their unique natures: mineral consciousness, atmospheric intelligence, and insectoid specialization created a balanced council that could debate decisions from multiple angles simultaneously. They emphasized preventing repetition of the last Warden's disastrous isolation. Historical record showed that solitary power inevitably distorted perspective, no matter how noble the initial intentions. The Flame's previous wielder had nobody to question their decisions, nobody to suggest alternative approaches, nobody to say when enough became too much. The team structure deliberately built in dissent and discussion as safety features rather than obstacles to efficiency. Their combined experience spanned contexts Zane couldn't possibly comprehend alone. Cathmar understood deep time and geological scale planning. Vorak perceived atmospheric pressures and system-wide patterns. Helix Nos brought meticulous detail orientation and multidimensional coordination. Together they offered guidance across scales from microscopic to cosmic, something no single advisor could provide. Their historical context covered civilizations that rose and fell before humanity discovered fire. This collective approach dramatically increased effectiveness against complex, multi-dimensional threats. The Devourers operated across too many parameters for any single being to counter effectively, no matter how powerful. Team coordination allowed addressing multiple threat vectors simultaneously, while maintaining overall strategic coherence. It turned what would have been desperate reactive measures into coordinated proactive defense. The formation represented evolution beyond the outdated solitary hero model of cosmic defense. Previous Wardens had operated like mythological figures, powerful but isolated, magnificent but ultimately vulnerable to their own limitations. The team approach acknowledged that modern threats required modern solutions, that existential risks needed collective responses rather than individual brilliance. It was the difference between sending a champion and deploying a specialized unit. They insisted on accompanying Zane because the historical record proved solitary Wardens inevitably failed. Absolute power required absolute safeguards, and the best safeguards came from having multiple beings who could say no when necessary. The Flame's corrupting influence worked through isolation and grandiosity. Having a team prevented both. They weren't there to serve the Warden but to serve the purpose the Warden represented, ensuring the power remained focused on protection rather than control. Their presence turned a potential tyrant into a first among equals, someone who could wield incredible power while remaining accountable to colleagues who understood the stakes better than anyone else in the universe. The Flame operated on ethical principles that made conventional power dynamics seem primitive by comparison. Its effectiveness wasn't simply a matter of technical application, but rather a question of alignment with fundamental cosmic values. The energy responded to purpose rather than force, to intention rather than technique. This created a system where the wielder's moral compass became the primary limiting factor, not their technical skill or raw capability. The setup ensured that power remained connected to responsibility at the most basic level. The tension emerged from this direct relationship between purpose and potency. Burning for others rather than self-interest dramatically increased the Flame's capabilities, while simultaneously reinforcing its moral integrity. Noble intentions created positive feedback loops where ethical alignment enhanced effectiveness, which in turn strengthened ethical commitment. Selfish applications produced the opposite effect: diminished power accompanied by increasing moral compromise. The system essentially had built-in safeguards against corruption through its operational mechanics. This principle prevented the kind of deterioration that destroyed previous wardens. The flame's nature meant that maintaining maximum effectiveness required maintaining maximum ethical clarity. Corrupt intentions literally weakened the power available, creating natural consequences for moral compromise. The wielder couldn't drift into tyranny without simultaneously losing the capability to enforce their will. This built-in limitation represented cosmic wisdom, far beyond any external oversight system. The arrangement demonstrated perfect balance between power and responsibility. One couldn't exist without the other in any meaningful sense. Absolute power didn't corrupt because absolute power didn't exist without absolute responsibility. The system ensured that capability remained yoked to ethical consideration at the fundamental level. This made the flame something far more sophisticated than a mere weapon or tool. It became a philosophical statement about how power should operate. The flame responded to noble intentions with enhanced performance because its design recognized that true strength comes from alignment with cosmic good. Selfish applications diminished its capabilities because they represented fundamental misalignment with its nature. This ethical dimension transformed what could have been simple energy manipulation into something approaching moral philosophy given physical form. The wielder didn't just learn to use power, they learned why power exists. This operational principle embodied deep philosophical understanding about power's proper use. It demonstrated that true capability comes from service rather than domination, from protection rather than control. The system recognized that power divorced from ethics becomes ultimately self-defeating, while power aligned with purpose becomes self-reinforcing. The flame's design showed centuries of refinement in understanding how to prevent power from corrupting those who wield it. The statement that the flame burns brightest for others means its effectiveness directly correlates with selfless intention. When used for protection rather than personal gain, for preservation rather than control, its capabilities expand exponentially. The energy responds to alignment with cosmic good by enhancing its own potential, creating virtuous cycles where ethical use increases power, which enables more ethical applications. Conversely, selfish use diminishes both power and moral standing, creating feedback loops that prevent corruption from gaining unstoppable momentum. The flame essentially makes morality practical. Being good literally works better than being selfish, making ethical behavior the most effective choice rather than just the nicest one. The station's AI underwent a transformation that revealed its fundamental limitations. Where moments earlier it had been announcing evaluation schedules with crisp efficiency, its voice now shifted to frequencies that vibrated through the deck plates. The cheerful vocal patterns gave way to something ancient and grim, like hearing a funeral director trying to remember how to conduct services after centuries of retirement. Emergency lighting replaced the welcoming bioluminescent displays, casting everything in stark red and blue that made the luxurious facility look like a crime scene. Normal operations collapsed under the weight of devourer assault recognition. The transition happened too rapidly for gradual adjustment. One moment routine bureaucratic functions, the next complete systemic panic. Maintenance drones abandoned their cleaning cycles to reinforce structural integrity fields. Refreshment dispensers retracted into armored compartments. Floating seating arrangements locked into emergency configurations that suggested they'd been designed for containment as much as comfort. The place shed its welcoming facade like a creature shedding camouflage when predators approach. This abrupt shift indicated threat levels far beyond standard emergency parameters. The facility's design specifications covered everything from reactor breaches to hostile boarding actions, but nothing in its programming addressed existential reality-level threats. The system struggled to categorize what was happening because their threat assessment frameworks didn't include categories for conceptual uncreation or reality editing. They kept trying to fit the devourer assault into familiar classifications, like energy weapons or infiltration attempts, creating diagnostic confusion that worsened the response. The collapse revealed uncomfortable truths about conventional galactic infrastructure. This was supposedly the Coalition's finest recruitment facility, equipped with the latest security and emergency systems. Yet it proved completely unprepared for threats that operated outside normal physical parameters. The station could handle riots, invasions, even dimensional incursions, but not something that made reality itself the battlefield. Its responses became increasingly desperate as protocols failed one after another. The emergency response highlighted the situation's gravity through its very inadequacy. When a state-of-the-art facility starts behaving like a primitive alarm system facing supernatural events, you know the problem exceeds design specifications. The AI's shift from cheerful efficiency to funeral dirges represented its best attempt to convey severity it couldn't properly quantify. It was using the emotional equivalent of screaming because it lacked the vocabulary to describe what was happening. This forced immediate adaptation beyond all standard procedures. The team watching the transformation understood they couldn't rely on station systems for support or guidance. The facility wasn't just failing to help, its frantic responses were becoming additional hazards. Emergency force fields snapped on and off at random, containment protocols activated against harmless objects, and environmental systems fluctuated wildly as the AI tried to fight something it couldn't comprehend. The station's AI recognized the cosmic emergency when its sensors started reporting impossible data. Regions of space ceased to register not just on tactical displays but on fundamental reality scans. The system encountered information that contradicted its basic understanding of how existence worked. This triggered emergency protocols designed for catastrophic system failure, which was the closest equivalent it had for reality itself failing. The AI shifted to funeral dirges because that was the most appropriate response it could muster for something that felt like the universe dying. It wasn't designed to handle threats to reality itself, so it did the only thing it could. It mourned. The bonding process began without ceremony or warning. One moment Zane was standing there wondering about compensation rates for cosmic emergencies. The next his nervous system started reporting sensations that shouldn't be possible. The flame didn't ask permission. It simply started rewiring his basic operating parameters. This wasn't power acquisition in any conventional sense, but rather existential integration at the most fundamental levels. His DNA started humming with unfamiliar frequencies while his consciousness expanded in directions he didn't know existed. Previous Warden's experiences flooded into his awareness not as memories but as lived realities. He felt the sting of impossible decisions made centuries earlier, the weight of sacrifices that had saved civilizations nobody remembered. Their wisdom arrived not as information but as instinct, their failures as cautionary emotions that tightened his chest. The process provided immediate access to centuries of accumulated experience, without the buffer of historical distance. He didn't learn their lessons. He remembered them as if they'd happened to him yesterday. His body flickered with residual energy that indicated profound transformation underway. Brief flashes of golden light shimmered around his hands when he moved, his shadow sometimes casting in multiple directions simultaneously. The physical manifestations represented only surface symptoms of much deeper changes occurring at the quantum and conceptual levels. His very particles were being realigned to handle energies that normally required specialized containment systems. The flickering showed his biology struggling to accommodate capabilities it wasn't designed for. This transformation shifted his perspective from individual to lineage consciousness. He stopped thinking in terms of personal experience and started perceiving through accumulated generations of wisdom. His decisions automatically factored in consequences that would unfold across centuries rather than days. The bonding made him part of something larger than himself, rewriting his basic understanding of identity and responsibility. He became less an individual and more a current manifestation of an ongoing tradition. The process proved both empowering and burdensome in equal measure. For every capability gained, he acquired corresponding limitations and responsibilities. The flame granted incredible power, but demanded perfect alignment with its ethical principles. He could feel previous Wardens' triumphs and failures influencing his choices, their experiences creating pathways he felt compelled to follow or avoid. The weight of all that history made simple decisions complex and complex decisions terrifying. It required character development beyond mere skill acquisition. Technical proficiency meant nothing compared to ethical clarity and emotional resilience. The bonding tested his values and priorities more severely than any capability. He found himself facing moral questions that had no clear answers, with the flame responding to his internal conflicts rather than his external actions. Maintaining the bond demanded constant self-examination and growth, with power levels fluctuating based on his alignment with cosmic principles. This represented the ultimate test of compatibility with cosmic purpose. The flame wasn't just assessing whether he could handle power, but whether he should handle it. The bonding process continuously evaluated his fitness based on criteria he couldn't game or fake. His very nature underwent scrutiny at levels beyond conscious control, with the connection strengthening or weakening based on fundamental character attributes he'd never considered important before. The bonding transformed Zane's being by integrating him into a lineage that transcended individual existence. His perspective shifted from personal concerns to cosmic responsibilities, his consciousness expanding to include generations of experience and wisdom. The process rewired his fundamental nature to align with purposes larger than any single being, making him both more and less than human in the process. He became a living connection between past and future, individual and cosmic, capability and responsibility, a transformation that changed not just what he could do but what he was. The galactic threat map bloomed across the main display with silent, terrible clarity. What had been abstract warnings became immediate visual reality. The scale of the Devourer advance now measurable in light years of perfect nothingness. Void zones appeared as precise geometric shapes scattered across the spiral arms, their edges sharp and unnaturally regular. These weren't the messy aftermath of battles or the chaotic scars of cosmic disasters. They were perfect erasures, regions where the universe itself had been edited down to fundamental emptiness. The mapping technology made the threat comprehensively concrete for the first time. Statistical estimates and sensor anomalies transformed into visual data that even a child could understand. The void zones showed clear patterns of advance, spearhead formations here, encircling movements there, systematic elimination of strategic points everywhere. This wasn't random consumption, but coordinated campaign strategy executed with terrifying precision across galactic scales. The Devourers operated like master tacticians rather than mindless consumers, their movements revealing careful planning rather than instinctual feeding. Multiple fronts became apparent across the galactic disk. The map showed three main advance vectors converging toward core systems, with secondary probing actions testing peripheral regions. Each front demonstrated different tactical approaches, some moving rapidly through sparse regions, others methodically eliminating densely populated areas. The pattern suggested adaptable strategy rather than fixed methodology, with the Devourers adjusting their approach based on local conditions and resistance levels. This adaptability made them more dangerous than any fixed pattern threat. The visualization revealed strategic points the Devourers had specifically targeted. They hadn't just consumed random systems, but had carefully eliminated key infrastructure nodes, communication hubs, and military outposts. Their advance showed understanding of galactic geography and strategic importance that shouldn't have been possible for outsiders. They'd removed the coalition's eyes and ears first, then its defensive capabilities, then its population centers. The pattern demonstrated military intelligence of the highest order, applied to existential warfare. This mapping transformed theoretical concern into practical, operational necessity. Where before the team had known the threat was serious, now they could see exactly how serious and where action needed focusing. The visual evidence made abstract concepts like existential risk into tangible problems with specific locations and timelines. The map didn't just show the threat, it showed the battlefield, the enemy's movements, and the limited time available for response. The galactic significance became unmistakable through sheer visual scale. The void zones already covered territories larger than most sovereign nations, with advanced patrols probing deep into populated regions. The map showed this wasn't someone else's problem happening in distant sectors. It was everyone's problem happening right now across the entire galaxy. The visualization made complacency impossible and immediate action unavoidable. The Devourer's strategy revealed itself through their advanced patterns. They operated like systematic archivists deleting unwanted files rather than conquerors seeking territory. Their movements showed preference for eliminating resistance before taking easier targets, suggesting they valued thoroughness over speed. The pattern indicated they weren't just consuming resources, but removing potential threats to their operations, demonstrating strategic thinking that considered long-term stability over immediate gains. Their approach was methodical, patient, and terrifyingly thorough, the work of beings who had done this before and perfected their techniques across countless campaigns. They moved like gardeners weeding a universe-sized plot, removing anything that might complicate their future plans with calm, systematic efficiency. The warden role carries power that rewrites cosmic rules yet demands eternal vigilance. This isn't about glory but balance, absolute capability matched by absolute responsibility. Zane's journey from credit-chasing contractor to cosmic guardian proves ordinary beings can handle extraordinary burdens when properly guided. His transformation underscores that potential often hides in unlikely places, waiting for the right challenge to reveal it. The galaxy's fate now rests not on one hero's shoulders, but on a team embracing collective wisdom over individual might. An unlikely group, mineral, mist, insectoid, and human, must now protect existence itself through cooperation rather than solitary power.